Today on the Servant Leadership Podcast, we're joined by Frank Carone, ranked as one of the most powerful people in New York. Frank Carone has spent his life navigating law, politics, and business at the highest levels. He built one of Brooklyn's top law firms and has advised some of the most influential leaders in the country, including New York City Mayor Eric Adams, whom he served as chief of staff. Frank now leads Oaktree Solutions, a strategic advisory firm, and is the author of Everyone Wins, a book on creating outcomes where relationships thrive and no one loses. In this episode, Frank shares what it takes to lead in complex spaces and the difference between power and influence.
Frank, thank you for joining us on the Servant Leadership Podcast.
Thank you so much, Chris. It's great to be here, and I'm looking forward to having a robust discussion with you.
I'm going to start us out with an interesting one. I was reading something online about you, and you were rated one of the most powerful people in all of New York in 2025, which that doesn't come by accident. Talk about your journey to become one of the most powerful people on a significant report that came out.
Well, first, don't believe everything you read. Second, it's embarrassing for me to even comment on something like that. I can't. I'll just talk about my career and why that perception exists that reporters wrote something like that. You know, it started really with my experience representing the Brooklyn Democratic Party for many years through three different county leaders. And Brooklyn, you know, is the largest Democratic county in the United States of America, so it's not insignificant. Senator Schumer, head of the United States Senate, Hakeem Jeffries, the leader of the House of Representatives, stem from Brooklyn. The mayor of the city of New York, the attorney general of the state of New York, all come from the borough and the borough's Democratic organization. So it started with sort of my role there, and then running and, you know, early on getting behind Mayor Adams and being part of the team that ran his campaign at a high level. And then when he asked me to be chief of staff at a Met game right after the primary, out of the blue, and then accepting and making changes in my career to do that, which was one of the greatest privileges of my life, serving as one of the leaders of New York City for the period that I did. So those positions and my openness with the press, I've always believed to be as transparent as possible and understand it's all business, bad, good articles, I guess led to that perception. And hopefully I'd like to think some of the accomplishments along the way that I helped facilitate just only added to that reputation. But there's many extremely talented people who you never heard of their name in New York who are much more significant than I am. But anyway.
Well, you've been a part of advising some of the most influential leaders throughout New York in the broader area. How do you see servant leadership show up? We talk about servant leadership a lot on this podcast, and you're seeing the behind the scenes of real leadership.
You know, we really should talk about that term a little bit. I've sort of read significantly over my adult life about servant leadership, and I think it probably started when I had the opportunity to participate in Officers Candidate School in the United States Marine Corps, and that is the quintessential servant leader. Marines teach leading from the front. You know, you don't ask any of your subordinates to do what you and yourself cannot do and not willing to do, and in fact do, and serve. The greatest sacrifice of all is laying down your life for what you love and believe in, and that is the true essence of serving at its hardest core example. So I really learned that term, and that we embodied it as an officer of the United States Marines when I attended Quantico, the school in Quantico. And then, of course, my faith through my life, raised as Roman Catholic. There's many examples throughout biblical, literature about serving and leading at the same time. And then leading is not about dictating, bossing. It's about, listening, sacrificing, and really that listening with great empathy has sort of really one of the main tenets throughout my book. Everybody wins, everyone wins, and so it's a terrific term. I think it should be used more often, and it doesn't necessarily suggest one type of career or another. It just means leading with humility and with integrity, I think.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your service as well. One of the things that I find so interesting is when people think of leadership, often what they think about is somebody at the top who has extreme power and they lead a lot of people and take massive hills and are hard charging people. You alluded to this book you wrote, Everyone Wins. And it's quite the opposite in some ways of one solo leader doing everything on their own. It's more about the whole. Talk about the book, how it came about, and really just share with our audience your heart behind the book.
You know, you just there is a sort of debate playing out politically now and culturally throughout the United States, and even now in the New York City Democratic primary for mayor, between socialism, capitalism. I think there's a misnomer that successful entrepreneurs or capitalists succeed by hard charging, as you say, and take no prisoners approach. And that only applies to the effort they bring to the table, which is constant and uh, just centered around enormous work. But you do not get that type of success without the help of others, without cooperation from others, and you don't get that without listening and aligning your interests with others, which is what we talk about in the book, and that's really the what drove us to write the book, the first version, when I was partnering with the team at Abrams Fensterman. And when I joined the firm, they had about 40 lawyers. When I left the firm to go, take the job as chief of staff to Mayor Adams, we were at 140 lawyers approximately. So my co-author, who I have to just talk about a little bit because it's relevant to how we came about writing the book, and to answer your question more specifically, Russ Prince, who's a prolific writer and speaker on business, on family offices, on alignment. And I was reading a book called Bargaining Brilliance by Louis Schiff, and in his prologue, he talks about one of his mentors, this recluse named who lives in a compound in Connecticut named Russ Prince. And Russ grew up in this gritty neighborhood called Canarsie, Brooklyn, exactly where I grew up, and had an incredible childhood learning how to negotiate in the schoolyard the old-fashioned way. But I saw that, and I immediately emailed Russ. Oh, and he responded within a minute. We met, and we became friends and colleagues ever since. To this very day, we collaborate extensively. So we talked about our interests, and we had a few speaking engagements together, and decided to write the first version, which was sort of after, kind of after him and I were working on some of the speeches I was giving on negotiation at the time. And then we were discussing the successes of this process and how it's teachable, learnable, but we need now to sort of fine tune it a little for version two and show the reading audience really how it worked for us in real life, with empirical evidence. So that led to the second version, and we did it fairly quickly, a couple of months. We had our manuscript, and we would, both of us, I took a few chapters, he took a few chapters, we would edit each other's work, and that's how we did it together. And that was really the purpose behind it, and it was a labor of love. Something that was very natural to us. It's not something that I read about, study about. It's just us being our authentic selves.
You've had to make a lot of hard decisions over the years, and I know you go into this when you speak, but at the same time, some of those decisions weren't necessarily what was best for you personally, career-wise or in unique situations. Talk about some of the hardest decisions you've made that required you to put the needs of others in front of yourself.
Really, the hardest decisions I had to make. And remember, I'm representing someone, an organization, an individual, a not-for-profit, a municipality. So first and foremost, my responsibility as a lawyer, as a consultant, as a strategist would be to service the need of the client that is paying me to do so, and with fidelity and good faith and fair dealing. So I never think about myself in those contexts, and I don't really engender clients that are opposite of my core belief system, just the way nature takes its course. So usually I'm somewhat aligned with the position I'm representing, but sometimes not. I should say there are exceptions to every rule. And as a lawyer, particularly when I was practicing criminal defense work in the early 90s, you represent your client zealously. But those that sort of impacted me personally were the ones that I had to sacrifice the time away from family, to be honest with you. And when I use my recent example, agreeing to chief of staff to the mayor, I knew I could not do this for a long period of time. So I told the mayor today that I did it. I would work 6 months in transition to build the team, build a culture for the team, and then 1 year as chief of staff. And I resigned the day I was hired. So he asked me in June of 21, and I said, okay, I'll take it until January 1, 23, December 31st, 22. So that I knew to do properly required a 24-hour, 7 days a week commitment for 18 straight months. So I moved away into an apartment in Midtown away from my family. Of course, I saw them now and then, but I was really focused on the job. So that was a difficult decision to sacrifice the time away from my family on top of my busy career to begin with, which, I had to sacrifice some important family time. And I would not suggest individuals do that. That was my decision. I don't regret it. A decision was made at the best at the time, but that was to truthfully answer your question. That was probably the most difficult.
Well, and you had some amazing influence during that stint, and made some great decisions that impacted a lot of people, especially around New York. Behind the scenes, I don't know if people realize the craziness that happens. How you even alluded to it's 24/7, for that whole year and a half, like it's just always on. Talk about how do you stay grounded during times of crisis and when just everything is coming at you, because people don't see that.
President Trump, I saw a quote from him on somewhere on social media. It was him speaking, and I think he was talking about mental illness and depression, and I think he said the cure for self esteem issues, depression, he believed was work hard. It kind of just puts you in a mindset of focus on a goal. So I stay grounded by keeping myself goal oriented. And there's no time to think of anything else when you're goal oriented because you have a mission. We're going to take this hill. What do we have to do to take this hill? And then we have to execute. And then when that hill is taken, there's always another hill somewhere else to take, metaphorically. So, that's how I do it. I just stay goal oriented, and it keeps me extremely focused. And, I have a ability to kind of compartmentalize things. And I just focus on the task at hand, and everything else just melts away.
You've built some absolutely amazing teams, like when you were at City Hall, also now with what you're doing at Oaktree Solutions. Like you've built some extremely successful teams, and it's not dumb luck that you're good at building teams. What do you look for in leaders, and how do you actually build a really solid team?
Yeah, it's great question. And as chief of staff, I remember the first day in there's a room called the COW, the Committee of the Whole, upstairs in City Hall, and we were wearing masks. It was still sort of coming out of the pandemic. It was still uncertainty in New York City. People don't realize just a short time ago how far New York has come, where tourism was, you know, uncertain. Office buildings were empty. Broadway was suffering. Crime was seemed to be out of control. There was a shutdown in mental illness, space for those who needed the treatment the most. There was, laws that were promulgated before we came into office that hurt the city specifically. There was a migrant crisis. So what we did to sort of deal with those was create a team that, for the most part, uh, did not implode, but worked without ego. Very hard to do, and I'm not saying we did it perfectly. But day one, I held up a book called The Culture Code, and we talked about a place where ideas could exchange, but when we leave the room, the decision is made as one. And also another one called Ego is the Enemy by Ryan Holiday. I don't remember the author of The Culture Code. And these are difficult things to do. Put your ego aside, particularly in government, because there's very little upside when you take experimental decisions or creative decisions, and a lot of downside when you make a mistake. So many of those who work permanently in government, nervous about doing things out that hasn't been done before or outside the box or quickly for that fear of that criticism. But it is that fear that paralyzes people. And it was my job to create a team that there was a ability to make mistakes, a comfort zone to make mistakes, but always with a North Star of doing something. And that team accomplished great things that first year, including the first ever privately funded soccer stadium in Queens, which had an infrastructure, component to it, environmental cleanup, significant growth for infrastructure, plumbing, roads, 2,500 units of affordable housing, a development in Kips Bay, Midtown, which was in previous administration had it earmarked for a garage, a sanitation garage, which now is a life science pavilion and hub uh, through on the CUNY space, several $billion together, cooperating with Governor Hochul and her great team, and then Secretary to the Governor Karen Keogh. We put an incredible bid together to win the Democratic National Convention, although we lost to Chicago, even though we had a much superior bid. But getting that together in 2 months quickly, um, and I could go on and on and on and on with incredible initiatives that the team did with this sort of embracing the culture of doing things. I would start a meeting with, "We're doing this. Let's figure out how now. Not let's debate to do it." And everyone had an opinion whether we should do it. When I was there, we were focusing on the rebuilding of the BQE, training folks for dyslexic screening, and I could go on and on and on and on. But you have to create an environment for that doesn't penalize mistakes, doesn't penalize people taking the initiative. You cannot. And that stems from the leaders, and it really was the mayor and myself at the time. And thereafter, the, the team has been terrific as well. And they deserve a lot of respect for the accomplishments. You're going to hear soon about some crime numbers that are at the historic lows, not over last year, better this year, in recorded history. So that happens with the culture that I know you speak about a lot on your other guests, and I know believe that, and sort of fits into the servant leader mindset. But it's cultural. So important to have the right culture. Weeding out toxicity and ego. Hard to do, but you have to do it like anything else, consciously, measurably, and really think about it every single day.
It is so hard to do. And I really like the analogy that you used earlier, or the example, where in politics, you often find politicians who, if they take a risk that they think is a good risk, the downside could be detrimental to their whole career. And so often you just see kind of the safest decisions possible. As our leaders who are listening to this episode and to the podcast in general, are navigating life, a lot of them are in situations where they probably have amazing ideas or amazing things they want to do, but those risks they're thinking could be detrimental to their career, or it could absolutely tank their company or hurt the people around them, or whatever it is. How do you even navigate thoughts like that? What advice do you have for people in those situations?
Easy, very easy. First of all, follow your heart at all times without fear. Do not be afraid of criticism. If you're not receiving criticism, you are not doing anything of substance. And there's a word in politics that is infectious. It's called optics. You hear it all the time. I remember very often lawyers, each agency has lawyers, and as much as they're, do really God's work, there's sometimes could be the reason for delay because of not the law, optics, how someone is being viewed. And I can't tell you how bad that is for citizens and for people to get results from their elected officials, from their bureaucrats that work on their dime as taxpayers, not so folks could just do nothing and be concerned about how they're being perceived. And it's a perfect example. Doesn't matter, agree, disagree on this example. Elon Musk decided to volunteer his time with president and work on something called Doge, right? And what is the concept there? Rooting out inefficiencies. Who could argue with that? It's inarguable. Everyone, that you must do that in every facet of life. And what did he get for that? Maybe he said things that were inflammatory, maybe he didn't. Putting that aside for a moment doesn't really matter. The core mission for anyone reasonable, logical sees rooting out inefficiency from a third party. You must do that. We require it of our not-for-profits. I know your experience in not-for-profit space. We require them to have outside auditors. Why? So they could root out inefficiencies and corruption. So he did that, and what did he get? Nothing but critique, nothing but animosity for what he believed doing the right thing. And I suggest and I submit, do not be afraid of that.
Mm.
Do not be afraid of that. I mean, I've taken my share of articles from press, and I hold it with a badge of honor. When people I love and respect tell me I'm doing something inappropriately, I'll listen. When strangers do, I don't know that I could care less.
It is hard because people in general get put in these situations where from the outside it feels like the world is just against you, right? And it's sometimes hard to figure out, okay, what is the true North Star that I'm trying to work towards? You've talked a lot about goals and ambitions and just continuing to push for what you know is right. It sounds so easy to say, right? But you've lived through having to do that. When people deal with that struggle of like, we know what we should do, but we just don't have it in us to do it, how do you encourage them to kind of get back on the track that they know they should be on and follow their heart?
You know, it's a great question, and I don't want to sound flippant, and I don't want to make it sound easy. You're right. For me, again, growing up in gritty neighborhood Canarsie, learning from the schoolyard how to survive, and going through the United States Marine Corps, taking my share of lumps, sort of allowed me to have a certain perspective. And what is that perspective? I'll share it. I shared this with the press once upon a time when they were asking me a similar question. I had a grandfather who fought in the Battle of the Bulge, and in the Ardennes forest, below zero temperatures, fighting against Nazi Germany. I had an uncle who was like an older brother to me who had a disease called cystic fibrosis, my grandfather's son. And he had a lung taken out at 16 years old. And I don't know that he ever had one clear gasp of air, ever in his life. And every night we'd have to pound his back to give him the therapy to pull out the mucus. Yet, I don't know that I've ever saw him without a smile on his face, without a positive attitude. My grandfather, out of the Battle of the Bulge, I don't know if I ever heard him raise his voice. So I think to myself, I'm not in the sub-zero weather fighting a war. I am not struggling with a life debilitating disease. What the hell do I care about a little bit of criticism or a little bit of difficulty along the way? I feel grateful that I have the life that I have in the greatest country in the world, and one of the, like I said before, New York City, where I could have anything I want within 5 minutes. This is a privilege, and you must think that way. And that would be the advice I would give folks, to have some perspective. If you don't have it, and if it's hard, volunteer with someone who has. Go to speak to veterans. Speak to those that suffered catastrophic disease or loss in their life, and use empathy to have perspective. And then when you sort of lay that against what you're really doing, you'll realize it's a grain of salt. So that's what I do, and it works for me. Not easy. We have emotions, we have egos, we have anger. All need work, like anything that's worthwhile in life. And at the end of the day, you just have courage. That's all. This too will pass.
I love that. The empathy helping shape perspective, I think, is spot on. One of the things you talk about, kind of your upbringing and also going into the Marine Corps, there were people who modeled servant leadership for you well before you became a great example of a servant leader, right? Who were some of those people, and how did they influence you into the person you are today?
I'll share two examples. I've had the good fortune of you know many adult men who I watched, I tried to emulate, who spent some time with me, including my dad, my grandfather I mentioned. There were two pivotal points in my life that always jump out at me, and everyone has their own. I remember my baseball coach in Canarsie High School, Bobby Napo. I loved baseball. I was a fairly decent player, and going to him one day saying, "Coach, I'm going to take the civil service exam." I think it was at that time was maybe applied to fire department, and I thought it was a very honorable, terrific thing to do. And he said to me, why would you, you're such a smart guy. You could do many things. Why immediately limit yourself to one? And I paused for a minute, and I was like, I never really thought of my future in that perspective. And for whatever the reason, at that moment, that triggered something in my mind that the world's a little bit of a larger place to think of. And the second, there was a recruiter for the Marine Corps named Captain Samuels, who, when I applied for officer candidate school, I was disqualified because I listed correctly on my application that I had asthma as a child. And it was an automatic disqualification. I didn't know. And, he called me up. He didn't hesitate. He didn't complain. He said, "We're going to appeal. We're going to beat this. And you're going to be a Marine." And just that conviction. And sure enough, we did, and I did. And it was that conviction that also spoke to me. So there's many more, but just two, in the interest of time, just two quick ones I thought I'd share.
Those are both great. And now you're in a position where you are those examples for many younger leaders, especially around the city of New York, right? There's people, young leaders trying to step into a space of influence. How do you encourage them to navigate this and really become the person they were made to be?
I try to do this with my 22-year-old son, who, like me at his age, would see someone very successful and right away want to either get discouraged because how on earth am I ever going to get that far? And therefore, then you sort of freeze and do almost nothing. So that is a huge mistake. You must do it in steps. First, yearly. We go back to what we said earlier, goal setting. Then you break the year down. I do this every year myself. Do this every day at 56 years old. What do I want to accomplish for the year? Then break it down quarterly, monthly, weekly, daily. So I have a roadmap just for that year. You put a couple of good days together, you have a good week. A couple of good weeks together, you have a good month. A couple of good months together, you had a great year. Put a couple of good years together, even if there's some up and downs, you have a great career. So you cannot think you could project that far ahead, but then you'd have to really bring it back to, I don't like to go more than 1 year in advance and think about the next step, building blocks. I remember I used to read a phrase in the Bible about building the house from stone versus straw or versus sticks. And when the winds come, the straw and the sticks blow away, but the strong foundation remains. Similarly, when you, for your career, you must do things in small steps and stay focused on those small steps. And before you know it, time goes by very, very quickly. And you have a body of work behind you. So my suggestion would be don't project more than a year, but do what you promise yourself to do. And even if you fail here and there, get back to it. So that's would be my advice for young people.
That is so good. Frank, I want to finish with 10 rapid fire questions where I hit you with questions and you say the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay, I'll try.
Who's the first person you think of when I say servant leadership?
Oh, Jesus.
5 words that most describe you.
Authentic, rough, sense of humor. It's more than put that as one, humor. I New York and Italian.
I love that. A favorite book or movie?
Favorite book, Godfather. The movie was great, but the book was way better. Favorite movie, I'm going to also say The Godfather.
Favorite food?
Italian food.
Favorite thing to do in your free time?
Golf.
What's a surprising fact about you?
Surprising fact about me? Oh, I don't know. I collect comic books.
All right. Favorite place you've been?
Oh, favorite place I've been? Probably Tuscany.
I half wondered if you were going to say New York. But favorite place that you want to go that you haven't been?
Germany.
What's the best advice you've ever gotten?
Whatever decision I make will be the correct one. Needs context. If I have a few moments, I'll share. But it's
Yeah, go for it.
When President Clinton was elected in 1992, we downsized the military. My class to go to Naval Justice School and the basic school in the Marine Corps to continue my career as a JAG officer shrunk down to almost nothing. I did not have a job, I didn't have a place to live, and I was in a little bit of limbo. So a year went by. I started working as a lawyer in several firms around the clock, including a criminal defense firm doing arraignments at night. Ultimately, offered me a partnership, and I, at the same time, got a call from a major who said, "Lieutenant, we have 6 seats available, 4 lawyers. We're going to draw straws. If your name is selected, are you ready to deploy next week?" I said, "I'm ready." He said, "I'll call you back." Calls me back, tells me my name was not selected out of the 6. And the next time they're going to draw straws will be 6 months from now, where I can't. So I could not take a real position anywhere. I could not start. I didn't have any money to live on. So I worked really, really hard that summer, and they offered me a partnership in the criminal defense firm. So I went to a mentor of mine and I said, "What should I do?" He said, "Well, whatever you do will be the right choice." And at first I was like, "Well, what kind of advice is that?" But then I realized it's brilliant, because whatever I decide, I'm going to make the most out of it and not look back. I chose to put in for a honorable discharge, wrote a letter to the Secretary of Navy, accept the partnership in the criminal defense firm, and my life went another direction. I never looked back once. So whatever decision you make, it'll be the right one if you make it so.
Wow, that is great advice. Well, Frank, I'm so thankful you were willing to be on the podcast. I know our audience will love getting to know you. For those that are wondering about the book, can you close us out talking about who should buy the book and what they should do that?
And anyone who has a goals that necessitates dealing with other people, which is almost everything, and anyone who does not have a significant network to speak of, and those who maybe struggle with conflict and, always feel victimized, should read the book and realize there is a methodology and a pathway for achieving your goal by directly aligning with others and not sacrificing anything. And negotiation is not a zero-sum game. That is a misnomer. It's incorrect, and we need to disabuse the audience of that.
And just so listeners know too, this is not just theory. This is practical pointers, practical tips that they can take. So thank you, Frank. I'm so excited for people to listen to this, and I really appreciate you being on.
Thank you for having me, Chris. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Servant Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed what you heard, please give it a thumbs up and leave a comment below. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to never miss an update. Be sure to check out the servantleadershippodcast.org for more updates and additional bonus content.